My name is Megan. I was 22 at the time, working the night shift at a mid-sized grocery store here in Appleton, Wisconsin. It was Thanksgiving week, so everything was even more chaotic than usual. Crowded aisles, pallets coming in non-stop. I usually took the night shift because it paid a little more, and I was trying to save money to move out of the apartment I shared with 2 college roommates. That specific night, I was assigned to restock the cereal section, which was always a disaster during the holidays, mostly because of the special edition boxes the store received. I was tired, irritated with the cold and the constant noise of carts, but nothing outside of the usual routine. The first sign that something was off was when I noticed a man standing at the end of the aisle, staring directly at me. It wasn't unusual to have confused customers, but he didn't have a cart, wasn't holding anything, and just stood there. He looked like he was in his 40s, wearing a dark green jacket and a plain baseball cap, the kind without a logo. I tried to ignore it and kept stocking the shelves, but every time I looked up, he was in a different spot of the aisle, always behind a shelf, watching me over the top as if waiting for me to notice. It wasn't a quick, curious glance, and it was constant, direct, like he was tracking every movement I made. When I started restocking the special Thanksgiving boxes, his behavior got even stranger. Every time I opened a new case, I heard slow footsteps walking into the aisle. And when I lifted my head, there he was again, standing perfectly lined up with where I was working. It was like he waited for the exact moment I touched those boxes to appear. I tried making conversation, asking if he needed help finding something, but he only gave a short smile, without showing teeth, and shook his head as if to say, no. Then he went back to standing completely still, watching every move I made through the gaps in the shelves, always keeping a distance that seemed calculated. I mentioned him to Nate, who was covering the frozen section that night, but when he came to check, the man had disappeared. That made me think maybe I was overreacting, maybe just too tired and misreading a weird customer. But not even 5 minutes after Nate left, the man returned to the exact same spot as before, as if he had never left at all. By that point, I was already uncomfortable, and every time I turned my back to grab more boxes from the pallet, I felt that sickening sensation that he would move closer the second I wasn't looking. He didn't say anything, didn't touch anything, just kept watching me like he was studying what I was doing. There was a moment when I had to crouch down to grab some of the smaller boxes that were stuck at the bottom of the pallet. When I stood up, I genuinely jumped because he was closer than before. Not close enough to technically invade my personal space, but close enough to make it clear this wasn't a coincidence. He still didn't have a cart, didn't have any products in his hands, just kept that strange fixed smile staring directly at my name tag. I even pulled my jacket a little forward to cover my name, but he had already read it. He repeated it softly, almost like he was testing the sound of the word, Megan. Just that. My blood froze. It wasn't a hi. It wasn't a question. Nothing. Just my name, said in a way that didn't sound normal. The night shift manager, Carla, walked into the aisle right at that moment, asking if I needed help with the larger boxes. And instantly, when she appeared, he turned and walked out of the aisle quickly, like he was deliberately avoiding being seen by someone else. I tried telling her that there was a customer acting weird, but Carla was overwhelmed dealing with an issue in the bakery area and just said something like, "Call on the radio if you need anything," before walking away. I stayed there alone again, trying to go back to normal work, but every sound of cartwheels or footsteps getting louder made my whole body tense up. But he didn't come back right away. Not until I finished the whole section and went to the back to grab an empty cart. When I came back, I truly hoped he had left, because it was almost 1 a.m., and things usually calmed down around that time. But when I turned into the cereal aisle, I saw the same dark green jacket at the end, standing exactly where I had placed the last boxes. He was pretending to look at the shelf like he was choosing something, but it was obvious he wasn't reading anything. His head was tilted just enough to follow every step I took as I approached. This time I didn't say anything. I just walked past him pushing the cart, but I could feel his eyes following me. And when I walked by, he said my name again, a little clearer, like he wanted to make sure I heard it. There was no one around for me to pretend he wasn't talking to me. The rest of the shift dragged on, and I kept jumping from aisle to aisle, trying to avoid anywhere he might show up. But every time I switched sections, It took less than 3 minutes for him to appear there too. He didn't do anything besides watching me, and that made it even worse because I had nothing concrete to report. He was just a customer walking around, watching me. When my shift finally ended, I went straight to the locker room, changed jackets, and took 3 deep breaths before stepping outside. The parking lot was freezing, with that kind of wind that burns your face, and the lighting was terrible. I just wanted to leave quickly, but the moment I turned the corner toward my car, I saw his silhouette standing next to a silver sedan, holding a box of the special Thanksgiving cereal, like he had been waiting for me. My body froze instantly. I thought about going back inside, but he had already seen me and started walking in my direction, still holding the box like it was the most normal thing in the world. The smile he gave wasn't friendly. It was strange, forced, and didn't match his eyes. I tightened my grip on my keys and tried to walk quickly to my car, but I heard his steps speeding up behind me. When I reached my door, before I could even unlock it, he pulled the passenger side handle and said my name again, louder this time, almost like he was excited. I couldn't respond, just tried to unlock the door, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped my keys on the ground. When I bent down to grab them, I heard him walking around the car, coming straight to my side, and the sound of the thin layer of snow crunching under his boots made my chest tighten in a way I had never felt before. I screamed Nate's name. I don't even know why. He probably wasn't anywhere near the exit, but it was instinct. The man stopped for a second, tilted his head like he was confused, and his smile dropped. He took 2 quick steps back, then 2 more, and just stood there staring at me without saying a word. That's when I heard sirens approaching. Someone from the team must have seen the situation through the cameras and called the police. As soon as the blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, he dropped the cereal box on the ground and ran to the opposite side of the parking lot, disappearing behind a few ice-covered cars. The officers arrived quickly and pulled me toward the store entrance, asking if I knew him or if he had said anything besides my name. I could only repeat that he had followed me the entire night, that he didn't buy anything, that he had just been watching me from the aisles. They searched the parking lot, checked some cars, but didn't find anyone. One of the officers asked if I wanted to file a formal report, and I said yes, even though I didn't know exactly what to write. While I tried to explain, they brought over the cereal box he had dropped. It was one of the special edition ones I had put on the shelf earlier, and it was clean, not dented, like he had chosen that specific box to show me. After things calmed down, the manager asked me to stay in the office until the police cleared the area. I remember sitting there shaking, trying to understand if any of it made sense. I didn't know that man, had never seen him before, yet he knew my name and acted like he had been waiting for me to come out just to follow me to my car. When they finally cleared me to leave, one of the officers stayed in the parking lot until I got inside my car and drove away, which I accepted immediately. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, convinced he would show up on some street. He wasn't arrested because he hadn't actually done anything concrete, and according to the officers, since he didn't say anything directly threatening, there wasn't much they could do. But a few days later, when I came back to work, I walked past the same cereal aisle where it all started. And just seeing those Thanksgiving boxes made my stomach twist like everything was happening all over again. Story 2. I was 15 when this happened, and at the time I was working a part-time job at a clothing store in the Fox River Mall here in Appleton, Wisconsin. It was Thanksgiving week, so the store was packed, and I had taken a shift until 11 p.m. to earn some extra money. When I left, all I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and eat whatever leftovers were still waiting from the dinner my dad always made. The street outside was freezing in that way that makes the air burn your nose, and the sidewalk to my house was covered in fresh snow. I remember feeling relieved when I saw the living room lights glowing through the window, because that always meant my dad was awake and that there was still warm food waiting. When I opened the front door, I noticed the whole house was lit up, the living room, hallway, kitchen, and I could hear the Thanksgiving playlist my dad always played while cooking. The smell of turkey still hung in the air, but something didn't match the time of night. On the dining table were freshly cut slices of turkey, glossy gravy, a dish of stuffing, and 2 used plates, as if someone had just gotten up. But the house was completely empty. I called out for my dad and my stepmom 3 times, walking from room to room, and the silence was absolute. His phone was thrown on the couch, The screen lit up with unread messages. The garage door was unlocked and the car was still there. And when I looked out the kitchen window, the snow in the backyard didn't have a single footprint. The first thing I thought was that maybe they had stepped outside to talk to a neighbor or help someone with something quick. But nothing made sense, because the food looked freshly served. Even so, I tried to convince myself I was too tired and misreading everything. I checked my phone for messages, but there was nothing. I walked through the house again, opening doors, calling louder until I started feeling that weird sensation when a familiar place suddenly feels wrong in a way you can't explain. The kitchen music was playing at a low volume, one of those old tracks my dad only used during the holiday. The music was so normal that it gave the impression someone was still there, except they weren't. I decided to go next door to see Mr. Bradley. He'd been a friend of my dad's for years and lived alone. Walking through the snow in that silence made me even more uneasy, because it was obvious there were no footprints except mine leading away from the door. I knocked hard and explained everything in a panic. The lights, the food, the silence. He grabbed his coat quickly and came with me, trying to calm me down, saying maybe my dad and stepmom had gone out to deal with something urgent. When we came back inside, I was ready to show him there was no one home. But before we even reached the kitchen, we heard laughter coming from the dining room, like the family had been sitting there the whole time. When we walked in, my dad, stepmom, and my sister were there, sitting at the table as if nothing had happened, laughing, adjusting the plates, like they were in the middle of dinner. They looked at me like I was the strange one for being scared. My dad asked why I had run to get Mr. Bradley, and I stood there trying to explain that when I got home, no one was there. The food was warm, his phone was on the couch. But they just exchanged looks and started saying they had gone to relax in the spa, that they were enjoying the holiday evening, as if that were normal. The problem was, we don't have a spa. The most we have is a small bathtub that barely works. Even Mr. Bradley gave me a weird look, like he was trying to figure out if I was exaggerating or if I had actually seen something strange. I told them there was no steam in the yard, no footprints, the doors were unlocked, but they kept acting like the night was completely normal. My dad even laughed, saying I must have been too tired after my shift. When Mr. Bradley realized they weren't taking anything seriously, he said he'd head home and that I could call him if I needed anything. As soon as he left, I went straight to the kitchen to show them the food and prove it was still warm like when I arrived. Except when I touched the plate, it was completely cold. Ice cold, like it had been sitting there untouched for hours. The soundtrack kept playing, but something about it felt wrong. It repeated the same intro over and over like it was stuck, and every time I walked past the radio, it restarted again. I tried to turn the radio off to see if it was just a device issue, but the button barely responded. When I finally managed to press it, the music stopped for less than a second and came back on its own, restarting at the exact same point, as if someone had pressed play again. My dad appeared behind me at that moment, asking why I was messing with things and telling me I was acting strange. I turned to him and explained everything again. The empty house, the warm food, the phone on the couch, the car in the garage. He just put his hands in his hoodie pockets and smiled in a way I didn't recognize. Not annoyed, not concerned, just empty. My stepmom came closer too, telling me I should take a bath and relax, that they were just enjoying the holiday and that I seemed too stressed. I couldn't accept their version of events. I went to the kitchen window and opened the curtain again to look at the backyard. It was completely dark, no lights, the snow untouched and smooth. No steam, no footprints, no sign that anyone had gone anywhere. They said they had been at a spa, but there is no such place on our property. Behind me, the music restarted once again, even though I was sure I had turned off the radio. My heart started pounding because by that point, I didn't know if I was losing my grip on reality or if something deeply wrong was happening. When I turned back to the table, the dishes looked even more out of place. Served food, used plates, everything arranged like someone had left in the middle of dinner, but without any indication that they had ever actually gone out or come back in. I decided to go up to my room because I needed to get away from them for a few minutes and try to understand what was happening. I walked up the stairs slowly, hearing the music restart again downstairs, and I realized my sister hadn't said a single word since I got home. She just stared at me with a weird smile, like she was waiting for me to react. When I closed my bedroom door, I stood there staring at the doorknob, trying to hear any movement in the hallway. Nothing. The house, which had felt alive moments earlier, now felt completely still, and the only sound was that muffled music repeating the intro over and over. I sat on the bed, still wearing my coat, trying to remember if I had noticed any detail that could explain what was happening. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to go downstairs again. The living room looked exactly the same, but somehow frozen. My family was sitting in the same positions, almost the same posture. My dad held a fork like he had been caught mid-movement. When they noticed I was there, they all turned their heads at the same time, and it made my stomach twist. I said I was going to the bathroom just to get out of that space and pass through the kitchen again. As soon as I crossed the doorway, the music restarted, again, even without me touching anything. That's when I noticed something else. The dirty plates on the table were dry. Completely dry, like they had been used hours ago, not minutes. I touched the turkey dish. It was cold. Freezing. But the whole house still smelled like fresh, hot food, like dinner had just been served. Nothing matched. I went to the back door because I needed to look at the snow up close. I opened it slowly, feeling the cold air rush in, and stepped onto the part still lit by the kitchen light. The snow was smooth, untouched, without a single footprint or drag mark, like no one had stepped outside since the last snowfall. The sensation that I had arrived at an actually empty house, truly empty, hit me hard again. I shut the door quickly and stood there trying to steady my breathing. When I turned back toward the living room, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, heavy steps, as if someone was dragging their heel along the floor. I thought it was my dad and felt relieved for a second, but when I reached the living room entrance, they were all sitting exactly as before. No one had moved. At that point, I was shaking. I went to the living room phone to call Mr. Bradley, but when I picked it up, it was dead, which made no sense because my dad always left it charging. I looked at the three of them at the table. They stared at me as if nothing was wrong, but there was no sign they had actually left or returned from anywhere. My stepmom asked if I wanted to join the dinner, but the plates were dry. The food was cold. None of it had been touched that night. I said I wasn't feeling well and walked to the front door. When I touched the doorknob, the music stuttered and restarted, again and again, as if reacting to my attempt to leave. I opened the front door, thinking that maybe some fresh, cold air would help me organize my thoughts. The street was silent, just the streetlights reflecting off the new snow. That's when I noticed something that made my heart race. Every other house had footprints, tire marks, signs of people coming and going for the holiday, except ours. Our yard, our sidewalk, even the driveway. Everything looked untouched, like no one had moved since the snowfall. Not even my dad's footprints from bringing in the trash earlier, or the marks from parking the car. It was like nothing had happened there all day. I went back inside slowly, praying it was just exhaustion messing with me. As soon as I crossed the doorway, the music restarted again, like it had felt me come back. I closed the door and turned to talk to my dad to try to understand anything. But when I looked at the table, they were gone. All three of them. The table was empty again, the chairs pushed the way they had been when I got home from work. The dinner plates were still cold and dry, the food untouched. The radio glitched once more and started the same track, like nothing had changed. My breathing got shallow and my hands started tingling. I took a few steps back, calling out for them, but the house was completely silent. No movement, no voices, no footsteps. It felt like I was right back at the moment I had arrived at 11 p.m. Except now I knew that for at least a few minutes they had been there, or something that looked like them. I wanted to run to their bedroom, but my legs felt heavy, like my whole body was trying to stop me. Even so, I walked down the hallway and opened my dad's bedroom door. The bed was made, the light off, everything exactly the way it would look if he had left early and hadn't come back yet. The bathtub was dry. No wet towels, no steam, no smell of soap. Nothing that suggested anyone had bathed or gone to a spa, like they said. I opened his closet and everything was in its usual place. The travel bag he always used when visiting my uncles for the holiday was sitting exactly where it always sat all year. My chest tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe in my own house. When I stepped back into the hallway, the living room light flickered once, just once. I looked toward the kitchen, and at that exact moment, the music restarted again. But this time it got stuck in a loop, repeating the same few notes like a scratched record. I tried turning off the radio for the second time that night, but when I pressed the button, the sound cut abruptly, only to come back on its own half a second later. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my room, sliding down to sit on the floor with my back against the door, listening to the echo of that looping music rising from downstairs. I stayed there until the sun started coming up. No one coming upstairs, no footsteps, no laughter, no conversation. The whole house remained exactly as it had been when I arrived, lit, smelling like warm food, but completely empty. Story 3. I was 24 when this happened, and at the time I was working as a newly graduated nurse at a hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. I had spent Thanksgiving on shift, so I could only go see my parents after midnight. I left the hospital still smelling like disinfectant, got into my car exhausted, and just wanted to drive along Highway 52 to Winona and get there before 3 a.m. The road was almost completely empty at that hour, just a few distant semis and piles of snow along the shoulders. I kept my dash cam on out of habit, since I usually drive alone at night and it makes me feel safer. Everything was normal for the first 15 minutes. Low radio, heater on, and that late-night silence that feels like it traps the air inside your car. That's when I noticed a dark SUV appearing in my rearview mirror. It wasn't very close, but I could tell it was big, probably an older model. At first I figured it was just another tired driver returning home after the holiday, because he kept his distance and stayed at the same speed as me. But a few minutes later I realized that every time I sped up a little, he sped up too. When I slowed down, he slowed down. It wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't just a random car, it was like he was syncing every one of his movements with mine on the highway. That's when I started to get alert. But I tried to convince myself I was just paranoid after a long hospital shift. The road got even emptier when I passed through a stretch with no lighting, where the only illumination came from my own headlights reflecting off the snow. In that section, I decided to test it on purpose. I pressed the accelerator lightly, just 5 mph over the limit, and the SUV did the exact same thing, keeping the same distance, as if it were connected to my car by an invisible cord. My stomach tightened because it no longer felt like coincidence. I thought about changing lanes just to check, and when I did, he changed lanes too, in the same second, without any hesitation. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I remember gripping the steering wheel hard, trying to come up with any logical explanation. About 10 minutes later, the highway curved long to the right, and the SUV vanished from my mirror for a few seconds. The relief I felt was so huge that I actually took a deep breath, thinking he had slowed down or taken some exit. But when the curve ended and the road went straight again, I saw something that froze me. The SUV had reappeared on the opposite side of the highway, moving slowly, almost as if it were watching me from the other lane. None of it made sense. There was no U-turn point there, no exit, no opening where he could have switched directions so fast. But there he was, driving slowly, his headlights perfectly aligned with my car. And the moment our vehicles crossed, he slowed down even more, and as soon as he passed, everything behind me went dark again. I kept staring in the rearview mirror for several seconds, waiting to see his headlights come back, but there was nothing, just an empty highway stretching behind me. Still, the feeling that he was somehow still close didn't go away. My whole body was tense, especially my shoulders, like I was bracing for something to jump out. I kept checking my mirrors over and over, trying to figure out if he had stopped, left the road, or if I had really imagined everything. But after driving past a stretch of dense trees, 2 headlights appeared again in my mirror. The same bright beams, at the same distance, exactly as before. It was the same SUV, no doubt about it. I couldn't see the driver, but I could feel him looking straight at me. That's when I started thinking about getting off the highway. I knew there was a truck stop about 20 minutes ahead, near a 24-hour gas station, and I decided I wasn't staying on an open road with that car glued behind me. I sped up a little to gain some distance and tried to stay calm, telling myself I just had to make it to that station. But the SUV sped up too. I went past 70 mph, and he maintained the exact distance. Not closer, not farther. When I finally saw the exit sign for the truck stop, my heart almost jumped. I braked hard, turned on my blinker, and took the exit. As I turned off, I saw the SUV's headlights slow down too, like the driver was deciding whether to follow me. As soon as I reached the truck stop area, I parked my car near the entrance lights where several semis were shut off with their drivers sleeping inside. I stayed inside my car for a few seconds, watching the exit to see if the SUV had followed. At first, I didn't see anything, just darkness by the off-ramp. Then suddenly the headlights appeared slowly, as if the driver were entering the station without wanting to draw attention. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. My vision almost narrowed. I grabbed my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to unlock it. I wanted to call the police, but first I needed to be absolutely sure of what I was seeing. So I left the dashcam recording and rushed out of the car, locking the door twice. I walked into the station trying to look calm, but my breathing was a mess. The clerk inside seemed bored, scrolling on his phone, not even noticing the state I was in. I grabbed a bottle of water just to hold something and went to the side window, where I could see part of the back parking lot. At first, nothing, just the shadows of the semis. Then, after about 20 seconds, the front of the SUV appeared between two trucks, parked in an unlit corner as if trying to hide. My mouth went dry instantly. The engine was off, the headlights were off, but the car was angled toward the station entrance. It didn't move any closer. It just sat there, watching. The clerk asked if I needed anything, but I couldn't even explain. I just pointed at the window and said, "There's a car following me." He looked quickly but said he didn't see anything, probably because the SUV was sitting exactly outside the lit area. I sat at one of the tables near the door because I didn't want to lose sight of the entrance. My leg bounced uncontrollably and I could barely hold the bottle. I kept repeating to myself that this was real, that I wasn't overreacting, that someone truly had followed me for miles. The clock on the wall said 2:38 a.m. when I noticed the SUV was still there, in the exact same spot, completely still. I couldn't see the driver, but I could feel that he was watching everyone who walked in or out. I spent a few more minutes debating whether to call the police, but all I could think about was how embarrassing it would be to explain, "There's a car sitting out there." Still, my instincts kept screaming that it wasn't safe to go back outside. That's when I remembered the dashcam. I grabbed my phone, opened the app that connects to the camera, and when the video loaded, my heart clenched painfully. The recording clearly showed the SUV following me, mirroring every move I made and then appearing on the opposite side of the highway during that impossible curve. And now on the live footage, it showed the SUV parked behind the station, exactly where I had seen it through the window. The car didn't move. Not even an inch. It just sat there, as if waiting. I showed the video to the clerk, and that was when his expression changed. He called the manager, and together they decided to phone the county sheriff. While they talked on the phone, I kept staring out the window, my stomach in knots because the SUV stayed there perfectly still, but I was certain the driver was facing the door where I sat. The next few minutes felt like an hour. The clerk told me to stay inside until the patrol car arrived, so I stayed frozen in the same chair, staring at the glass door. Every time a car passed on the highway, I held my breath, thinking the SUV would move, but it didn't, not once. When the patrol car finally pulled into the lot, the flashing red and blue lights lit up everything, including the dark area behind the semis. That's when the SUV turned on its headlights, not speeding off, not making any sudden move, just turning them on as if waking up. The officers drove straight toward it, but before they reached it, the SUV backed up slowly and slipped behind a row of trucks. The officers circled the entire lot in under a minute, but when they came around the back, the vehicle was gone. The deputies returned to talk to me and asked if I had seen the driver. I told them no. The windows were always too dark, and I never even saw a silhouette. I showed them the dashcam footage, and their faces changed immediately. One of them asked if I wanted an escort out of town, and I agreed instantly. Before we left, I looked out the window one last time. The area where the SUV had been parked was completely empty, like no car had ever been there at all. When I finally got into my own car, my fingers were shaking so much I had to take 3 deep breaths before turning the key. They drove ahead, and I followed close behind. Only when we reached the highway again, with the patrol car beside me, did I realize how much time had passed. 40 minutes. The SUV had stayed parked behind that truck stop for 40 minutes, watching. Story 4. I was 27 when this happened, and at the time I was working as a delivery driver for an automotive parts company. I spent a lot of time on the road, mostly driving between small towns in Georgia, and I was already used to long night trips. On that particular night, I was driving back from Vidalia to Macon after a shift that had started way too early and ended way too late. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I decided to stop at a tiny gas station, one of those in the middle of nowhere, just to use the bathroom and buy something to keep me focused for the rest of the drive. The place had an old pump, weak lighting, and only one car parked near the convenience store. I was too tired to think anything was strange. I just wanted to stretch my legs and grab some coffee. As soon as I stepped out of my car, I noticed a woman leaning against the corner of the store, slightly hunched forward with her arms crossed, staring straight at me. She looked to be in her mid-30s, hair tied back carelessly, and wearing a large, worn-out hoodie with dark stains I couldn't quite identify in the moment. When I started walking toward the store entrance, she approached quickly, almost like she had been waiting for that exact moment. She called out to me in a low, raspy voice, asking if I could help her with money for gas because, according to her car had died there earlier. But when I pointed to the pump and asked if she wanted me to pay directly at the screen, she stepped back and shook her head quickly, saying, "Not there, not there," almost as if she was afraid to get anywhere near the pump. She got closer to me than I was comfortable with, holding the cuffs of her hoodie like she was trying to hide her hands. She repeated again that she needed help, but that she couldn't stay out front, and asked me to go with her to the fence in the back. The way she said it, whispering and glancing behind her every 2 seconds, made my whole body tense up. I asked why she couldn't just explain right there, and she grabbed my arm without asking, squeezing hard. Her voice dropped even lower when she said, "I need to show you, before they come back." A shiver went straight up my spine. I gently pulled my arm back, trying not to show panic, but her grip only tightened. That's when I noticed something else. She wasn't really looking at me. She kept scanning the area, the empty road, the dark field behind the station, the pumps, like she was expecting someone to appear at any moment. When I asked who they were, she didn't answer. She just repeated the same words, but this time almost soundless, like she was rehearsing the phrase instead of explaining it. "Before they come back. Before they come back." I told her I was going to get the store clerk, but she pulled my arm again, this time harder, like she was desperate. My heart started racing because something about her behavior wasn't just fear. It had this pushy, insistent edge to it, like she was trying to lead me to one specific spot in that dark, isolated property. I tried stepping away, telling her I wasn't walking anywhere without knowing what was going on, but she took another step toward me, her face almost touching my shoulder. The way she whispered didn't sound like someone asking for help. It sounded like someone trying to convince me quickly, before I had time to think. She kept insisting she needed to show me something behind the fence, that it would be fast, that there was still time. Whenever I tried to look her in the eyes, it seemed like she was about to cry, but her expression changed too quickly, like she was forcing herself to look desperate. When I took a step back, she grabbed my jacket with both hands, and that's when I noticed her sleeves were damp, like she'd been handling water or mud. My whole body went into alert at that. I told her I was just going to grab my wallet from the car and that I'd be right back, trying to get away from her without pushing her or escalating things. As soon as I said that, she let go of me and stepped backward but kept staring, like she needed to make sure I'd do what she asked. Even so, I walked straight to my car without looking back. When I reached the door, I heard her say something like, "Don't let them see you going." And that made such a cold, sick feeling hit me that my hands started shaking as I tried to unlock the door. I got inside as fast as I could and locked the doors the moment I sat down. I looked in the rearview mirror and she was still there, standing completely still, staring at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind and follow her. I sat there for a few seconds with the engine off, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She didn't just seem scared. She seemed like she was trying to pull me toward something specific, and that made me even more nervous. I decided to start the engine and leave, but before pulling out of the parking lot, I watched her through the rear view again. She didn't come closer, She didn't knock on the window. She didn't ask for help again. She just stood there completely still, staring at me. The weak station lights barely lit her face, but I could see her mouth moving like she was repeating something to herself. I was so focused on her that I almost didn't notice the store clerk coming to the door, looking out at me like he sensed something was wrong. When I put the car in reverse, the woman took 2 slow steps forward as if trying to stop me. She didn't touch the car, but her intention was clear. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Near the fence in the back and where she wanted me to go, there were tracks on the ground. It looked like someone had been walking back and forth in that part of the property, even though it was dark and isolated. The tracks disappeared just past the fence, as if someone had dragged things out of sight from the station. A wave of panic hit me so hard that I shifted gears and pulled out without looking back. Even then, as my car picked up speed on the road, I had this overwhelming feeling that she was still watching me, even when the station was no longer visible in the mirror. Once I got on the highway, my heart was pounding too hard for me to just keep driving as if nothing had happened. I pulled over on the shoulder a little farther up, just to breathe and try to figure out whether I should report it. While I sat there, I grabbed my phone and quickly looked up recent news in that county. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but the sense of danger wouldn't go away. That's when I found a short article from 2 days earlier about a kidnapping and extortion case involving a woman who approached drivers alone at rural gas stations in the region. The description matched almost perfectly. Approximate age, loose clothing, always asking for help away from the pumps, always insisting people follow her to a secluded area. My body went cold instantly. The article said she never worked alone. I drove to the nearest police station, still shaking, and told everything to the officer working the night shift. He asked for details, the time, the exact location of the station, how she tried to pull me away. When I mentioned the phrase, "before they come back," he cut me off quickly and wrote everything down. He said they had already received similar reports, all involving drivers traveling late at night in isolated areas. Before letting me go, he told me not to return to that region unless absolutely necessary, and to stick to more populated routes whenever possible. I walked back to my car feeling lightheaded, thinking about what could have happened if I had followed her to that fence. The bad feeling stayed with me the entire drive. To this day, whenever I stop at a gas station in the middle of the night, I double-check everything around me before opening the door. Story 5. I was 8 years old when this happened, and at the time I lived with my mom on a very quiet street in Columbus, Ohio. It was a neighborhood full of similar-looking houses, small lawns, and a school bus stop at the end of our street where I waited every morning before class. I always left home around 7:05 because the bus arrived at 7:15, almost on the dot. It was winter, always dark at that hour, and I carried a backpack way too big for my size. It was around that time that I started noticing an older boy, maybe 16 or 17, always sitting on the bench at the bus stop before I got there. At first I thought he was just waiting for a ride or going somewhere, because he never said anything. After a few days, he started talking to me. Nothing scary at first, things that sounded like an attempt to be friendly. He asked if I liked school, if I collected stickers, if I had pets. He smiled in a shy sort of way, but the smile stayed fixed and he didn't blink much. One day he showed up holding a bracelet made of colorful beads and said he had made it for me. I didn't know how to refuse without seeming rude, so I accepted it and thanked him, even though something about it made me feel strange inside. My mom always told me not to accept things from strangers, but I was a kid and didn't want to cause trouble. The next day he showed up with a hand-drawn card. After that, a sticker. Every day another little gift. As the weeks went by, those gifts started coming with stranger questions. First he asked what kind of drawings I liked. Then he asked if I lived near the corner or closer to the middle of the street. I remember trying to answer in a vague way because the questions made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. He always smiled whenever I said anything, like he was paying far more attention than anyone would during a normal conversation with a child. One day he brought a little keychain shaped like a heart and said he had more things at home, and that he could give them to me, if I told him my address exactly. I shrugged and told him my mom didn't let me say where I lived. He didn't insist at that moment, but his smile widened for a few seconds and I remember feeling a strong urge to step away. My mom eventually noticed that I was coming home with these little objects. She asked who gave them to me, and I told her about the boy at the bus stop. Not scared because I didn't understand yet that it could be dangerous. I talked about him like he was just someone nice giving me things. Her expression changed instantly. She asked me to show her exactly where he sat, whether he tried to touch me, whether he followed me. I told her no, that he just sat there waiting before I arrived. The next day, she decided to go with me to the bus stop, standing a few meters away to watch. The boy showed up as usual, but when he saw my mom, he stayed in the same spot, didn't smile, and didn't say a word. He stared at the ground until the bus arrived. When the doors opened, he simply stood up and walked in the opposite direction, never looking back. My mom didn't like his behavior at all. Over the next few days, my mom started walking me to the front door and watching the street before letting me go alone. But the boy never came back to the bus stop. I thought maybe he'd changed his schedule or started at another school, and I tried to forget about it. But one night, while we were eating dinner, my mom froze with her fork in the air. She was staring out the living room window, the one that faced the end of our street. I turned to look too, and even though it was dark, we could clearly see his silhouette standing down there. He was right at the point where the street curves, standing alone facing our house. He wasn't moving, no car nearby, nothing that explained why he would be there. My mom stood up so fast her chair fell over. She went out the front door without even grabbing a coat, and I ran after her as far as the porch. I watched her walk quickly down the sidewalk, calling out to him. The boy didn't run. He didn't go into any house. He didn't get into any car. He simply stepped back a few paces, still staring at my mom, then turned and walked down the street like he had no reason to be there in the first place. My mom called out to him again, but he didn't answer. He just kept walking until he disappeared behind the houses at the corner. When she came back inside, I had never seen her look so serious. She told me I wouldn't be going to the bus stop alone for a while, and that if I ever saw that boy again, I needed to get away immediately. I didn't fully understand the danger at my age, but the way she closed the curtains that night scared me. The next morning, my mom called the school and explained the situation, asking the bus driver to keep an eye out. She also talked to a few neighbors, wanting to know if anyone recognized the boy or knew where he came from. Nobody had any idea. There was no teenager that age living in the nearby houses, and no one remembered seeing anyone who looked like him around. Even so, for an entire week, my mom walked me to the bus stop, and the boy simply didn't appear. No shadow, no figure in the distance, nothing. The street looked normal again, but my mom kept glancing over her shoulder every minute, like she was expecting him to show up out of nowhere. I could tell because her hand squeezed mine tightly whenever the wind rustled the trees. A few days later, my mom got a call from the school asking if we could come to the office. There, an employee said she had found a folded piece of paper in the lost and found box on the bus, with my name written on the front. Was it my handwriting? No. It was large, shaky handwriting. Clearly someone older trying to make it look childish. Inside was a drawing of a little girl with a backpack, and next to her, a boy holding something behind his back. There was no note, no signature, nothing else. My mom went pale. The principal asked if we knew who could have put it there, and my mom just said she had a suspicion. When we left the school, she locked the car doors and told me that if I ever saw that boy again, anywhere, I needed to run straight into the house without talking to anyone. Story 6. I was 16 when this happened, and at the time I worked occasionally at a video game store in a small strip mall in Dayton, Ohio. It was a simple part-time job I took after school so I could save money and buy my own things. The store was narrow, with tall shelves and a tiny storage room in the back that was always locked. That afternoon, everything happened within just a few hours. It was a Wednesday, a little past 4, and business was slow. The manager, Rob, had left to drop off a package at another store, so I was alone at the counter for about 40 minutes. No big deal. I'd been alone before. Outside, the sun was setting and the parking lot was starting to empty out. That's when he walked in. I had seen this guy a few times before, but never paid much attention because he always came in, asked something quick, and left. But that afternoon, he came in differently. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds, like he was trying to see who was behind the counter before deciding whether to actually enter. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, wearing a worn brown jacket, an old cap, and a bulky backpack slung over his shoulders. He wasn't the kind of customer you'd normally notice, but the way he looked at me when he stepped inside made my stomach tighten. He didn't look around the store, didn't glance at the aisles. He looked straight at me like he already knew I was alone. He started walking slowly through the aisles, but he wasn't really looking at the games. It seemed like he was only pretending to browse while keeping his head turned toward me the entire time. After a couple of minutes of that, he came up to the counter and asked if we had some older editions that might be stored in the back. The way he gestured toward the storage room door made me uncomfortable immediately. I explained as normally as I could that the back room was locked, that I wasn't allowed to go in without the manager, and that everything available was out on the floor. He nodded but kept standing there staring at me like he was waiting for me to change my mind. His expression was strange, emotionless, almost fixed. After that, he started trying to make small talk, but it wasn't about games at all. He asked what school I went to, if I lived nearby, what time I usually got off, whether I came alone. I tried shutting down the conversation by answering briefly and shifting back to talking about games, but he kept circling back to personal questions. At one point he asked quietly if I could just open the storage room door for a second because he wanted to see a box he was pretty sure was back there. I told him I couldn't, that it was store policy, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. He gave a short smile, almost impatient, and asked if I was afraid of him. I said no, that it was just the rule, but I could feel my breathing getting uneven. He stood there for what felt like much longer than it really was. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, leaning on the counter with his backpack still on. The store was completely silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. I tried to keep myself busy by organizing some boxes behind the counter, but I could feel his eyes following every one of my movements. After a while, he stepped to the side and asked if he could at least walk with me to the storage door just to check a specific game. He said it in a calm, overly gentle voice like he was trying hard to sound harmless, but the expression on his face didn't match his tone. He looked irritated beneath the surface, even while smiling. When I told him no again, he dropped the fake smile and changed his tone completely. He started talking faster, asking why I was making this difficult and saying it was just opening a door. I stepped back a little because the whole store felt smaller with him standing that way in front of me. I told him to wait for the manager if he really needed something in the back. He took a deep breath like he was holding in anger and said he'd come back when he's here, except he didn't leave right away. He wandered the aisles for another 10 minutes, constantly looking over his shoulder to see if I was watching him. When he finally left, he pushed the door open too hard, making the bell jingle loudly. I tried to convince myself he wouldn't return. When Rob came back about 15 minutes later, I told him everything, trying not to sound as shaken as I was. He got serious immediately, but said that unfortunately, since the guy hadn't done anything explicit, there wasn't much we could do besides being cautious. I tried to calm down, but my whole body was still tense, like I was waiting for the man to show up again at any moment. The mall was getting emptier as evening settled in, and the parking lot lights were starting to cast long shadows across the storefront windows. I tried to focus on work, but every time someone walked past the glass, my heart jumped, thinking it was him. And it didn't take long for that to happen. Around 6:30, right when I normally clocked out, I saw his silhouette in the parking lot. There was no mistaking him. He was leaning against one of the pillars just a few yards from the store door, his backpack on the ground and his arms crossed. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't pretending. He was just there, staring straight at the entrance like he was waiting for me to come out. I froze. Rob saw him too and said there was no way I was going to walk out alone. He stepped outside first, walked up to the man, and said something I couldn't hear. The man picked up his backpack slowly, stared at Rob for a second, and walked away like nothing unusual had happened. Even after he left, I couldn't relax. The feeling of being watched was stuck in my body, like he was still somewhere in the parking lot where we couldn't see him. Rob told me to wait inside while he closed the register and turned off some of the lights. The store, already small, felt even more silent when he shut off the background music. I tried not to look at the glass door, but it was impossible not to check every few seconds. The street in front of the mall was almost empty, and the cold wind made the metal trash cans rattle with a hollow sound. That kind of silence makes everything 10 times more intense than it should be. When we finally locked the store and walked toward my car, the parking lot felt larger than usual. Most of the lights were on, but some flickered, and every shadow looked like movement. Rob walked slightly ahead of me, scanning every direction, and I held my keys with a shaking hand. We were only a few feet from my car when suddenly my phone vibrated in my pocket. I thought it was a message from my mom, but when I looked at the screen, my heart nearly stopped. It was an unknown number, and the message said, "You took long today." I froze. Rob turned to ask why I'd stopped, and I just showed him the screen, unable to speak. Before he could react, another message came through. "I'm still watching you." I hadn't given my number to anyone in that mall. In that moment, my throat closed up. The whole area around us felt too quiet, like even the wind had stopped. Rob grabbed my phone out of my hand and started scanning the lot more urgently. He told me to get in the car immediately and lock the doors. I didn't think twice when my hands were trembling so badly I could barely press the remote. As soon as I sat down, the phone vibrated again. Another message from a different unknown number. "No need to be scared." I froze. It was impossible for him to see me getting into the car unless he was somewhere close, but we couldn't see anyone. Rob paced between the rows of cars, checking every possible angle, but there was nothing but shadows. When he came back to my window, he told me to start the car and drive straight home without stopping anywhere. He promised he would write down the time, call mall security, and report it to management. I put the car in gear and pulled away fast, but as I approached the traffic light at the exit, my phone vibrated again. The message said, "You drive fast when you're nervous." A cold wave climbed up my spine so hard I almost lost my breath. I looked in the rearview mirror expecting to see his jacket, his backpack, anything. But the street behind me was completely empty. Just me. No one else. The last thing I remember before speeding away was the feeling that he was somewhere in the dark, close enough to see everything, but far enough not to be seen. Story 7. I was 17 when this happened, and it was one of the first times I ever drove alone after getting my permit in Springfield, Illinois. It happened on a Saturday night, on my way back from my friend Rachel's house, which was about 20 minutes from mine. I was excited and a little nervous, trying to follow exactly what my dad had taught me. Keep a steady speed, watch the intersections, and always slow down at corners. It was almost 10:30 p.m., and the streets in her neighborhood were lined with big trees and old street lamps that made everything look yellowish. I was calm until I turned the first corner to head home, and that's when I noticed a white car parked on the opposite side of the street. An older sedan, headlights off. I didn't think much of it at first. I just thought it was odd that the driver was sitting still, staring straight ahead. I kept driving normally, turned another corner a few blocks later, and there was the same white car, parked at the corner, headlights still off, at the same distance from the curb, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. I even slowed down a little, thinking it might just be another similar car, but it wasn't. It was the same one. Same hood shape, same little blue sticker on the bumper. My heart sped up because there was no logical way he could have gotten there before me. There was no shortcut that would let him bypass me without passing right in front of my car. Even so, I tried not to panic. I kept going, turned onto a bigger street, and when I reached the third corner, he was there again. I froze for a second when I saw that car for the third time. There was no one else outside, no lights except the street lamps, and that sedan looked even whiter against the darkness. The driver still hadn't turned on his headlights and wasn't moving at all. He just sat there, slightly leaning forward, staring toward the intersection as if he were waiting for something, or someone. I swallowed hard and kept driving, trying to look calm, but my hands were starting to sweat on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself maybe it was coincidence, maybe he was looking for an address, but it was obvious that wasn't it. He was parking exactly at the streets I turned onto, always before I arrived, always at the perfect spot to watch me enter. The fourth time was the worst. I turned onto a street that led directly into my neighborhood, a narrower road with more houses. As soon as my car aligned with the corner, there he was again. Parked, headlights off, engine running. I could see the faint vibration of his dashboard lights. And this time he turned his head toward me, slowly, as if he wanted me to notice. My stomach flipped. It was a man, probably in his 40s, with his arm resting on the open window. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the silhouette, but I could feel that he was staring at me in a way that was too direct, too intentional. I didn't think. I just pressed the gas. I sped up more than I should have on a residential street, but my instinct was screaming to get away as fast as possible. Even so, I kept checking the rearview mirror constantly, trying to see if he would follow me. For a few seconds I didn't see anything, and I almost convinced myself he'd stayed behind. But when I made the final turn before my block, headlights flicked on at the far end of the street, headlights that hadn't been on before. It was him. I recognized the shape of the car instantly. He started driving toward me slowly, not accelerating like someone trying to catch up, just moving at a steady pace, as if he only wanted to keep visual contact. That's when my chest started to hurt from nerves. All I wanted was to get into my garage and close the door. When I pulled up to my house, my first instinct was not to go in right away. My dad always said that if something strange was happening, it was better to drive around the block instead of stopping in front of the house. But that night my body didn't respond. I just pulled into the driveway and pressed the remote for the automatic garage door. It started lifting so slowly, painfully slow for the state I was in. And that's when I saw the white car appear at the end of the street again, heading toward me. He slowed down immediately, as if he wanted to give me time to realize he was coming. The whole street felt smaller, quieter. The only sound was the soft noise of his tires against the pavement. I drove into the garage as fast as I could, almost scraping the side mirror on the frame. I pressed the remote again to close the door, but it felt like it was coming down in slow motion. The garage light turned on automatically, bright and exposing, and I felt completely vulnerable inside. That's when the white car passed in front of my house. He didn't speed up. He didn't look away. He just rolled by slowly, almost stopping with the driver's window down. The man turned his head toward me and stared inside the garage as if he were trying to memorize every detail. Where I was, what I was doing, how long the door took to close. I remember holding my breath without realizing it. The door finally touched the ground, and only when the metal clank echoed did I notice that my hands were locked around the steering wheel. I stayed sitting there for a few seconds, listening to my heartbeat in my ears. The silence inside the garage felt louder than the sound of his car passing by. When I finally got out, my legs were shaky. I went to the door that led inside the house and locked it behind me. Before going upstairs, I peeked through the living room window, lifting the curtain just a little. The street was empty. No headlights, no parked car, nothing. But the fear didn't leave. He didn't speed away, didn't try to hide, didn't do anything suspicious. He just drove by slowly, staring directly at me, as if confirming that this was where I lived. I went upstairs, still trembling, trying to understand if it had really happened the way I remembered. I stood at my bedroom window for a few minutes, watching the street like the car might appear again at any second. It didn't. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still somewhere nearby, maybe on the next street over or parked at some darker corner, waiting for my bedroom light to turn off. I grabbed my phone to text Rachel, but my hands were shaking so much I mistyped the passcode twice. I told her everything, but while I was typing, that sick feeling in my stomach came back. Because every detail was so specific, so intentional, that none of it felt like coincidence. My mom heard me come upstairs quickly and knocked on my door asking if I was okay. I opened it just enough for her to step inside and told her everything, trying not to cry. She got serious immediately, not doubting a single part. Before I even finished, she was already moving through the house, checking if all the doors were locked. Then she turned off the living room lights and watched through the curtain the same way I had minutes earlier. We stayed there for about 10 minutes in complete silence until she told me to park the car in reverse inside the garage the next day, so the door would close faster behind me. I barely slept that night. I stayed awake until nearly 3 a.m., lifting the curtain every time I heard a car drive by. None of them were white. But to this day, every time I turn a corner at night, I remember the way that man looked at me, like I was just a point on his route, not someone simply trying to get home. Story 8. I was 20 years old when this happened, and at the time I was living in Kansas City with a college roommate named Ashley. We had a habit of watching late-night movies because our work schedules matched. On that particular night, a Friday, we went to the last screening of a movie we'd really been wanting to see, and it ended around 12:15 a.m. The theater was in one of those open shopping centers with all the stores closed and a huge parking lot that's almost completely empty at that hour. The temperature was low enough that we could see our breath. I was tired and just wanted to go home, but we were still laughing about a scene from the movie as we walked toward the car. We usually parked closer to the entrance, but this time there were no spots left when we arrived. So we parked farther away, almost near the edge where the open field begins and the parking lot gets darker. I remember digging through my purse to find the keys when Ashley suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence. She put her hand on my arm and whispered, "Don't look all at once. There's a guy standing between the cars." Of course, my first instinct was to turn around immediately, but I tried to do it in the least obvious way possible. When I shifted my head just a little, I saw exactly what she meant. A man standing on the other side of the parking lot, perfectly aligned with the row where our car was parked. He wasn't walking, just standing there. Shoulders raised, arms down, body slightly leaned forward like he was paying way too much attention. The first thing that made my stomach tighten was realizing he wasn't standing near any car in particular. It was like he had chosen the exact center of that empty aisle to stand. The second thing was that he was looking directly at us. Not at the parking lot, not at the ground, not around, at us. I tried to convince myself he might just be waiting for a ride, but his posture didn't match that at all. No one stands completely still like that at midnight in an empty lot. Ashley whispered, "Walk normally. Don't let him know we noticed." So we did, trying to keep a steady pace, pretending to be calm, while the sound of our steps echoed on the cold concrete. When we reached the middle of the parking lot, I turned instinctively just to check if he was still there. And he was, but closer, not walking, not shifting sides, just closer. The distance looked like it had cut in half, and I knew for a fact he hadn't taken a single visible step while we were looking. Ashley saw my reaction and sped up, grabbing my arm. We were almost running without admitting it. Every 3 or 4 steps, I'd turn my head again, and every time I checked, he was closer. Not walking, just closer. As if each time I blinked or looked forward, he used the moment to move nearer. When we were about 20 meters from our car, I turned again to check his position, and this time my heart shot up so fast I almost lost my breath. He was right in the center of the lane now, at a distance that made absolutely no sense compared to the last place I'd seen him. And the strangest part was the way he stood, torso slightly forward, like he was ready to move quickly at any moment. Ashley squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't let him see we saw." But it was too late. He knew. You could feel it physically, like a pressure in the air. When we got to our car, Ashley dropped her purse trying to find the key and everything spilled. The coins hitting the ground sounded so loud I almost screamed. I was facing the corridor, keeping my eyes on the space between the cars. And the second Ashley clicked the key fob, he was no longer where he should have been, gone from my line of sight, as if he had evaporated between the cars. I stepped back without thinking, pushing Ashley to open the door faster. The air felt colder, heavier, and I swear I sensed something, not a sound but a presence, too close. When the lock finally clicked, I yanked the handle so hard I nearly tore it off. As soon as I opened the door, I practically shoved Ashley inside and jumped into the passenger seat, since she'd grabbed the key first. I kept looking outside, trying to understand where he could have gone. The entire parking lot was silent, just a few lamps on and the wind pushing trash on the ground. Nothing else. No footsteps, no shifting shadow, no explanation for where he'd disappeared to. Ashley turned on the engine with shaking hands and locked the doors as soon as the car hummed. She backed out slowly, afraid of hitting the cars next to us, and I kept scanning the surroundings, looking for any sign of him. The feeling that he was still nearby hadn't faded at all. When Ashley turned the wheel to leave the parking space, I turned my head to look out the opposite window, and almost screamed. He was right there, standing on the right side of the car, so close I could see the outline of his jacket under the dim lamp. He hadn't made any sound, not a single step, nothing to indicate he'd moved all the way there. He was so close that if I'd reached out my hand, I could have touched him. Ashley saw my reaction and turned her head fast, and when she saw him too, she let out a breathless, "Oh my God." He was staring directly at me like he knew exactly where I would look, as if he'd been waiting for that exact moment. Ashley didn't think twice. She hit the gas before the car was even fully straightened, making the tires screech against the concrete. I grabbed the dashboard as the car jolted, and for a second I thought we'd crash into the pillar beside us. His body fell behind quickly, but not because of our speed, because he didn't move. He just stood there completely still, as if he didn't care that the car was tearing out right in front of him. I turned to look back right as Ashley reached the main lane of the parking lot, and he was still there, standing in the exact same spot, watching us without taking a single step. Not running, not reacting, just observing. Ashley raced out of the parking lot so fast something slammed inside the glove compartment. When we turned onto the main road, we finally breathed, but it was that shallow, shaky kind of breathing that never fills your lungs. I was still gripping the door handle so tightly my fingers hurt. The street was almost empty, a few stores still lit and a truck driving up ahead, but nothing eased the sensation that he was still around somehow, even though it made no sense. Ashley kept repeating, "He didn't make any noise, and he didn't make any noise," like she was trying to process something impossible. I just nodded because I couldn't explain it either. That entire parking lot was concrete. Any step, any run, even someone tripping would echo. But he showed up right beside us with no sound at all. Ashley drove to my house, 10 minutes from there, though it felt like 30. We kept checking the mirrors constantly, expecting to see headlights approaching slowly or a car slowing down behind us, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't calm down. I kept replaying his posture in my mind, how close he'd been to the window, the way he stared like he had been waiting. When we turned onto my street, Ashley slowed down and asked if I wanted her to stay over. I wanted her to, but I also wanted her to get home safely, so I told her I'd text her as soon as I got inside. When she stopped in my driveway, I took a deep breath before opening the door. My house was completely dark except for the porch light, and everything felt quieter than usual. I was about to step out when Ashley grabbed my wrist and said, "Wait, look." She pointed toward the street on the other side of my house. I turned, thinking she was just being paranoid, but my heart nearly stopped. A car was driving by slowly, very slowly, and when it aligned with the front of my house, its headlights briefly lit the hood. It was white, a white sedan. It slowed down almost to a stop, and I saw the silhouette of the driver turn his head toward my driveway. He didn't speed up. He didn't drive off. He just stared for several long seconds. At that moment, I couldn't move. My hand was on the car door handle, frozen, watching the white sedan almost stopped in front of my house. He didn't block the street, didn't do anything aggressive. He just slowed down until it looked like he was gliding. The driver's head stayed turned toward me like I was the only thing in the entire street that mattered. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ashley whispered, "Go, go now." But my legs wouldn't react for a few seconds. Only when the white car finally began moving again, slowly, did I manage to open the door and get out, nearly stumbling on the step. I ran to my front door without looking back. My hands were shaking so badly I missed the keyhole twice before getting it right. When I finally got inside and locked the door, I leaned against it, breathing hard, trying to hear anything coming from outside. Nothing. Just the quiet of my house. I texted Ashley quickly, saying I was inside and telling her to drive off fast, but to text when she got home. I went to the living room window and pulled the curtain just enough to see the street. The white car was gone. No lights, no engine, nothing, but I knew that didn't mean I was safe. He had followed me all the way to my house, without hiding it, without doubting I'd notice. I stood by the window for a few minutes trying to steady my breathing, but the feeling that he could reappear at any second didn't fade. The street was completely empty, but I remembered the way he had appeared in the parking lot, without sound, without footsteps, without warning. So even though I saw nothing outside, I knew that didn't mean he was far away. I closed all the curtains in the living room, then the kitchen, and turned off the hallway light. Each switch felt too loud in the silence. It felt like I was trying to hide inside my own home. When my phone buzzed, I almost dropped it. It was Ashley saying she was home and her street was quiet. It should have comforted me, but the feeling of being watched lingered, not from a distance but close, like someone was standing right outside my door. I walked to the front door very slowly and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty porch, the light on, and the dark yard. Still, I locked the deadbolt, slid the chain in place, and checked everything twice, even though I knew none of it would matter if he wanted to come back. I went back to the living room without turning on any lights and sat on the floor against the couch, listening for any unfamiliar noise. I only got up when I heard my mom pulling into the garage about 20 minutes later. When she came in and turned on the light, my body loosened a little, like it was the first real breath I'd taken since the theater. I told her everything from beginning to end. The man standing between the cars, the silent steps, him appearing on the opposite side of the car, and the white sedan creeping past the front of the house. My mom listened quietly, her face tense in a way I'd only seen a few times. Then she said we would install new outdoor lights and a camera facing the garage the next day. She knew it wasn't paranoia, and I knew it too. That night I slept in her room with the door locked from the inside. Still, I kept hearing every car passing by, even the ones slowing down for the speed bump near our house. Every time headlights reflected on the wall, my body froze. None of them were white, none stopped, none came back. But the fear stayed for weeks. And even today, when I leave a movie theater late at night, I don't just look both ways. I check every corner. Every parked car with the headlights off. Every driver who sits perfectly still for too long.
Thank you for staying until the end of this video. It's amazing to have you here accompanying me until the end of the stories. If you liked it, leave your comment telling what was the story that moved you the most. And if you are not yet registered, sign up so you don't miss the next ones. Until next night of scary stories.